In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where life seemed ordinary and peaceful, one fateful afternoon would change everything. A father, a seasoned FBI agent, receives a phone call that sends his world into chaos. His son, a vibrant 13-year-old boy, is found unconscious at the bottom of a pool, the victim of a cruel act by someone sworn to protect. But what this officer didn't know was who he was up against. This is a story of justice, resilience, and the lengths one father will go to protect his child and expose the corruption hiding behind a badge. What happens next will leave you speechless. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting an amber glow over the community pool nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Laughter echoed across the water as children splashed and played, their carefree voices a stark contrast to the tension simmering just beyond their awareness. Nathan Davies, a lively 13-year-old with a radiant smile, had been the heart of the fun that day. His athletic build cut through the water with ease as he raced his friends, his laughter infectious and unrelenting. His mother often teased him about his love for the water, calling him her little dolphin. Today was no different. His joy filled the air like a melody, pure and unrestrained. It wasn't long before the tranquility was interrupted. Officer Byron strode into the pool area, his polished boots crunching against the tiled pathway. He wasn't in uniform. Out of duty, he was off the clock, but the badge on his hip and the authority he exuded carried weight. His presence turned heads, not in admiration, but in apprehension. Byron had earned a reputation in the community, one built on intimidation and power plays. His gaze swept over the pool, lingering on Nathan and the other black children playing near the deep end. His face twisted into a scowl. He didn't need to speak for the tension to thicken. His body language screamed disapproval. "Hey, you." His voice cut through the air like a whip, drawing silence from the group. Nathan turned, his wet curls dripping water onto his shoulders, his expression shifting from joy to confusion. "Me?" Nathan asked, his voice steady but puzzled. "Yeah, you," Byron barked, pointing a finger. "What are you doing here? This is private property." Nathan furrowed his brow. "I live in the neighborhood. My friends and I always come here." Byron scoffed, stepping closer. "Don't lie to me, boy. I've had complaints about kids like you causing trouble around here." "Kids like me," Nathan repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm not causing trouble. I'm just swimming." The exchange caught the attention of nearby adults. A few began to edge closer, their expressions uneasy but unwilling to intervene. They had seen Byron in action before and knew better than to cross him. "Don't talk back to me," Byron snapped. His tone carried a weight that made even the adults shrink back. "Get out of the pool. Now." Nathan hesitated, glancing at his friends, then back at Byron. "I didn't do anything wrong." The words sealed his fate. Byron's patience snapped like a brittle twig. In 2 quick strides, he reached Nathan, grabbing the boy's arm and yanking him out of the water. Nathan yelped in surprise, his small frame no match for Byron's brute strength. "What are you doing?" Nathan cried, struggling against the grip. "Teaching you a lesson," Byron hissed, dragging him to the pool's edge. Before anyone could react, he shoved Nathan back into the water, this time holding him down. Nathan thrashed, his arms flailing as his lungs screamed for air. Gasps erupted from the onlookers. A woman's shaky voice broke the silence. "Stop it. You're hurting him. Stay out of this," Byron growled, not even glancing at her. His focus was on Nathan, who was now clawing at the officer's hands, his strength fading. Seconds stretched into eternity. The onlookers froze, caught between fear and disbelief. Finally, Byron released his grip, letting Nathan's limp body float to the surface. The boy's face was pale, his chest still. Panic rippled through the crowd. Someone dialed 911, their voice trembling as they explained what had happened. Byron, on the other hand, stood back, his face void of remorse. He pulled out his phone and made a call of his own, reporting the incident with a rehearsed calm. "Suspect was engaging in reckless behavior," he told the dispatcher. "Attempted to resist when I intervened. Situation under control." Paramedics arrived minutes later, pulling Nathan from the water and rushing him to the hospital. The crowd parted for the ambulance, their faces etched with a mix of horror and helplessness. Byron lingered at the scene, his confidence unshaken. To him, it was just another incident, another display of his dominance. He had no idea the boy he had just nearly drowned was the son of a man who had made it his life's mission to expose corruption and deliver justice. Miles away, Robert Davies's phone buzzed. He glanced at the caller ID, unknown number, and picked up, his tone brisk and professional. "Agent Davies," he said. The voice on the other end was strained. "This is the county hospital. Your son, Nathan, has been admitted. It's serious." Robert's heart sank. What happened? "There was an incident at the community pool," the voice began, but Robert didn't wait for the explanation. He was already grabbing his keys, his mind racing with possibilities. As he sped toward the hospital, a storm brewed within him. He didn't know the full extent of what had happened, but one thing was certain. Whoever had hurt his son would soon learn the true meaning of justice. The fluorescent lights of the hospital lobby were harsh, almost sterile, as Robert Davies strode in, his steps quick and purposeful. His sharp suit, neatly pressed, and the subtle gleam of his polished shoes contrasted sharply with the disarray he felt inside. Robert had faced some of the nation's most dangerous criminals, yet the call about his son had left him shaken in a way nothing else ever had. "I'm here for Nathan Davies," he said, his deep voice firm yet tinged with urgency as he approached the reception desk. The nurse glanced up, startled by his intensity. "Room 312, ICU," she said, gesturing down the hallway. "He's stable, but—" Robert didn't wait for her to finish. He was already moving, his mind a whirlwind of fears. As he neared the room, his pace slowed. Through the glass window, he saw Nathan lying on the hospital bed, a pale shadow of the lively boy he'd hugged that morning. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, their rhythmic beeping the only reassurance that his son was still alive. "Nathan," Robert whispered as he entered the room, his voice breaking for the first time in years. Sitting beside the bed was a woman with tear-streaked cheeks. Isabel, Nathan's mother and Robert's ex-wife. Her face lit up with a mix of relief and pain when she saw him. "Robert," she said, standing. "They said—" Her voice cracked. "They said he almost drowned. The doctor said it's a miracle he's still here." Robert nodded, his jaw tight. He placed a hand on her shoulder before stepping closer to Nathan. He knelt by the bed, his large hand enveloping his son's smaller one. The sight of the boy's fragile chest rising and falling sent a wave of both gratitude and rage through him. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, though Isabel could feel the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. "A police officer," she said bitterly. "He accused Nathan of trespassing, then dragged him out of the pool. People said he held Nathan underwater. Robert, he tried to." She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking into a sob. Robert closed his eyes, his fingers tightening around Nathan's hand. His son's innocence, his love for life. How could anyone see that and still act with such cruelty? His mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a simple act of negligence. This was a deliberate abuse of power, and it wouldn't go unanswered. "Did you see the officer?" Robert asked. "No," Isabel replied, wiping her tears. "But others did. They said his name is Byron. Officer Byron." The name hit Robert like a trigger. Byron. The officer's file flashed in his memory, a brief but damning record of complaints and suspicions, buried under bureaucratic red tape. He had seen men like Byron before, officers who hid their prejudice behind a badge, using it as a shield for their abuse. Robert stood, his back straightening, his face unreadable. "I'll handle it," he said simply. Isabel looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Get justice," Robert replied, his tone steel hard. "For Nathan. For every other kid Byron's hurt." Back at his home office, Robert transformed. The father who had knelt at his son's bedside became the meticulous FBI agent known for unraveling the most complex cases. He pulled out his laptop, accessing databases and reports that most people couldn't even dream of seeing. Byron's personnel file was as Robert remembered, thin but suggestive. Multiple complaints of excessive force, all dismissed after internal investigations. A pattern of targeting minorities noted but never acted upon. Robert's lips pressed into a thin line as he scanned the details. Byron wasn't just a bad officer. He was a predator shielded by a broken system. Robert delved deeper, using every tool at his disposal. He hacked into traffic camera footage near the pool, hoping to piece together the timeline of events. It didn't take long to find what he needed. Grainy but unmistakable footage of Byron storming into the pool area, his demeanor aggressive. Robert's stomach churned as he watched the events unfold, culminating in Byron holding Nathan underwater. But that wasn't all. A closer look revealed something unexpected. Byron's vehicle, parked just outside the pool, wasn't marked. It was a personal car, one registered to a name Robert didn't recognize. Cross-referencing the name led him to a shocking discovery. Byron had been moonlighting as an enforcer for a local crime ring. The car had been spotted at several known locations tied to illegal gambling and drug distribution. A slow, grim smile spread across Robert's face. Byron had handed him the leverage he needed, an opening not just to take him down for Nathan's assault, but to dismantle the network protecting him. The following day, Robert visited the pool, his every movement deliberate. The area was quiet now, the laughter and joy replaced by an air of unease. The lifeguard, a young woman with wide, haunted eyes, approached him hesitantly. "You're Nathan's dad, right?" she asked softly. "I am," Robert said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to know exactly what you saw." She nodded, her voice trembling as she recounted the incident. Officer Byron, he was so angry. He said Nathan didn't belong there. When people tried to step in, he threatened them. I didn't know what to do." "You did enough," Robert assured her. "Thank you." As he left the pool, his resolve hardened. Byron had underestimated Nathan. He'd underestimated Robert. But most importantly, he'd underestimated what a father, especially one with Robert's skills and resources, would do to protect his child. Justice was no longer a question of if, but when. And Robert intended to make sure it was swift, thorough, and unforgettable. The air in Robert's office was thick with tension as he sat at his desk, sifting through the growing mountain of evidence. The glow of his computer screen illuminated his face, sharp and focused, his eyes scanning every detail with the precision of a man who had spent his career chasing the truth. For Robert, this wasn't just another case. This was personal. Pinned to the wall in front of him was a whiteboard, a web of connections he meticulously mapped out. At the center was Byron, his photograph, his name scrolled in bold letters, and a timeline of his actions. Surrounding it were names, places, and events that painted a damning picture. A corrupt officer hiding behind his badge while operating his muscle for a criminal syndicate. Byron wasn't just guilty of what he'd done to Nathan. He was a rot in the very foundation of law enforcement. Robert leaned back, rubbing his temples. He wasn't just going to get Byron fired. That wasn't enough. He wanted to dismantle the system that allowed men like Byron to thrive, to make sure Nathan's pain wasn't repeated. But he knew he couldn't rely on the local police. Byron's network was too entrenched, his allies too loyal. Robert needed another plan, one that would bypass the local bureaucracy entirely. The next morning, Robert paid a visit to an unlikely ally, Martin Gibbs, a former informant turned mechanic. Martin had spent years in the criminal underworld before Robert had pulled him out in exchange for testimony in a federal case. Now he ran a small garage on the edge of town, far removed from his old life, or so it seemed. Robert stepped into the dimly lit garage, the smell of oil and grease heavy in the air. Martin looked up from under the hood of a car, his face lighting up with surprise and unease. "Agent Davies," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't think I'd see you again. What brings you here?" "I need information," Robert said bluntly. "About Byron." Martin froze, his expression darkening. "Byron? That cop's bad news. You know that?" "I do," Robert said. "That's why I need your help." Martin hesitated, glancing around the garage as if expecting someone to be listening. "Look, I've got a clean slate now. I don't want to get dragged back into that mess." Robert stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "This isn't about you. It's about my son. Byron nearly killed him." Martin's eyes widened, and for a moment, sympathy flickered across his face. "Your kid? Damn. I'm sorry to hear that." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "All right, what do you need?" "Byron's connection to the syndicate," Robert said. "Everything you know." Martin nodded slowly. "Byron's been working for them for years. He's their go-to guy for intimidation, shaking down businesses, silencing witnesses. But he's sloppy, leaves a trail. If you're looking to take him down, you need to hit him where it hurts." "And where's that?" Robert asked. Martin smirked grimly. "The safe house. They use it for meetings, stash money, keep records. Byron practically lives there when he's not flashing his badge." Robert's mind raced. A safe house meant evidence, documents, recordings, maybe even a direct link to Byron's crimes. "Where is it?" Martin hesitated. "You're playing a dangerous game, Davies. They find out you're sniffing around. They won't hesitate to come after you and your family." Robert's gaze hardened. They already came after my family. After a tense moment, Martin relented, scribbling an address on a scrap of paper. Be careful, he said. These guys don't play fair. That night, Robert parked his unmarked SUV a few blocks away from the address Martin had given him. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. He adjusted the earpiece connected to his covert surveillance equipment, his FBI-issued gear hidden beneath a black jacket. The safe house was a dilapidated building, its windows covered with grime and its front porch sagging under the weight of neglect. Robert surveyed the area, noting the lack of security cameras, an oversight that hinted at the arrogance of those inside. He moved quickly and silently, picking the lock on the back door with practiced ease. Inside, the air was stale, the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering. Robert's sharp eyes scanned the dimly lit interior. A table in the corner was piled with cash and ledgers, while a laptop blinked faintly on a desk nearby. Robert moved to the laptop first, inserting a USB drive to clone its contents. As the drive worked, he rifled through the ledgers, photographing every page. His heart raced as he found entries detailing payoffs to local officials and detailed logs of Byron's activities, including dates that matched complaints filed against him. This was the smoking gun he needed. Suddenly, the sound of voices echoed from the front of the house. Robert froze, his instincts kicking in. He slipped into the shadows, his hand resting on the concealed firearm at his hip. Two men entered, their conversation laced with crude laughter. They didn't notice Robert, their focus on the table of cash. One of them, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, picked up a ledger, flipping through it casually. Byron's got himself in trouble again, the man said. He's getting sloppy. He's a liability, the other replied. Boss might cut him loose if he screws up one more time. Robert's mind worked quickly. Byron was losing favor. That meant the syndicate wouldn't protect him if Robert acted fast. As the men settled into a card game, Robert slipped out the back, the evidence secure. He made it to his car and drove off, his heart pounding. He had what he needed, but he also knew this was only the beginning. Back at his office, Robert reviewed the evidence, piecing together a case that not only implicated Byron but also exposed the corruption that shielded him. The ledgers detailed bribes to high-ranking officials, payments to silence witnesses, and even ties to violent crimes that had gone unsolved for years. As he stared at the files spread before him, Robert made a silent vow. Justice wasn't just about putting Byron behind bars. It was about dismantling the entire system that allowed men like him to thrive. For Nathan, for every child and family who had suffered under Byron's reign, Robert would see this through to the end. The storm inside him had found its purpose, and nothing, not fear, not threats, not even the syndicate itself, would stop him now. The dawn broke over the city, painting the skyline in hues of orange and gold, but Robert Davies's home office remained a shadowed sanctuary of focus and resolve. The evidence he had gathered sat neatly organized in piles across his desk. USB drives, photos of ledgers, screenshots of Byron's communications, and transcripts of incriminating conversations. Robert leaned back in his chair, sipping black coffee, his mind weaving together the intricate threads of his plan. He wasn't just going to arrest Byron. He was going to dismantle the entire network that had protected him for years. But this operation needed precision, and Robert had no intention of leaving anything to chance. The first call Robert made that morning was to his closest ally in the FBI, Special Agent Alexandra Hamilton, a no-nonsense investigator with a reputation for exposing corruption at every level. Her voice crackled through the line, sharp and alert despite the early hour. "Davies, it's been a while," she said. "What's this about?" "Alexandra, I need you," Robert replied, his tone serious. "I've got a local officer who's tied to a criminal syndicate. There's evidence of corruption, extortion, and attempted murder. My son is the victim." Alexandra's voice softened. "Your son, Robert? I'm so sorry." "Save it," he said quickly. "What I need is backup. This isn't just about Byron. The syndicate he's working with has deep roots in the city. I need a team I can trust to take them down." Alexandra hesitated for only a moment before replying. "Send me the files. I'll assemble the team. But Robert, if this is as big as you say, we're going to need airtight evidence." "You'll have it," Robert promised. By the end of the day, Robert's next move was risky but necessary. He contacted the syndicate directly, using an encrypted line to reach one of their mid-level operatives. The man's voice was gruff, suspicious. Who the hell is this? An interested party, Robert said, his tone icy. I have information that could save your neck or bury you alongside Byron. There was a long pause. What do you want? Byron has become a liability, Robert continued. You know it, and I know it. I've got the proof to take him and your entire operation down. But I'm giving you a chance to cut ties and walk away clean. The man chuckled nervously. You think you can threaten us? This isn't a threat, Robert said coldly. It's a fact. You have 24 hours to hand over Byron and any additional evidence on his dealings. If you don't, I'll make sure every federal agency from the FBI to the DEA has their eyes on you. The line went dead, but Robert knew the seed had been planted. The syndicate would be forced to weigh the cost of protecting Byron against the risk of exposure. By evening, Robert had received a call back. It was the operative, his voice strained. You're playing a dangerous game, Davies, but you've made your point. Byron's at the warehouse on 5th. He thinks it's a meeting, but it's a handoff. Do what you want with him. Robert's grip on the phone tightened. You've made the right choice. Now stay out of my way. Robert relayed the location to Alexandra, who confirmed that her team was in position. It was time to move. The warehouse was a sprawling, dimly lit building on the outskirts of the city. FBI agents surrounded it, their movements swift and silent. Robert, clad in a bulletproof vest, stood alongside Alexandra as they prepared for the raid. Inside, Byron paced nervously, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding around him. He glanced at his phone, waiting for the promised meeting, unaware that the syndicate had washed their hands of him. When the FBI breached the warehouse, Byron's reaction was immediate. He reached for his weapon, but Robert's voice cut through the chaos. Don't even think about it. Byron froze, his eyes locking with Robert's. Recognition and panic dawned in an instant. You, he hissed. This is about your kid. Robert stepped forward, his expression hard as stone. This is about justice, Byron, and your time is up. The agents cuffed Byron as Robert watched, his presence a reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. The raid uncovered more than just Byron. Hidden compartments revealed stacks of cash, incriminating documents, and even unregistered weapons. The operation was a success. Back at FBI headquarters, Robert and Alexandra reviewed the results of the raid. Byron's cooperation came quickly once he realized the syndicate had abandoned him. His confession, coupled with the evidence Robert had gathered, paved the way for a massive indictment against the syndicate and its corrupt allies within the police department. But for Robert, the most important moment came when he returned to the hospital. Nathan was awake, his eyes brightening as Robert entered the room. Dad, Nathan said, his voice weak but steady. Did you get him? Robert sat beside him, taking his hand. Yeah, buddy. We got him. And a whole lot more. Nathan smiled faintly, a glimmer of the joy that had been stolen from him. Good. Robert leaned in, his voice soft but firm. No one's ever going to hurt you like that again. I promise. As he sat there, holding his son's hand, Robert knew the fight for justice was far from over. But for now, he had won the most important battle of all, restoring safety and hope to his son's world. The days following the raid on the warehouse were a whirlwind of interrogations, paperwork, and media speculation, though Robert ensured his family's involvement stayed buried beneath layers of federal confidentiality. The operation had been a resounding success, dismantling the syndicate's core and exposing a network of corruption that stretched further than Robert had initially anticipated. But victory came with a cost, one Robert felt keenly as he returned to the hospital where Nathan was recovering. Robert sat in the corner of Nathan's hospital room, the soft hum of monitors punctuating the silence. His son slept soundly now, the bruises on his arms and the haunted look in his eyes a reminder of how close Robert had come to losing him. It was a fragile peace, one Robert had fought tooth and nail to secure. Isabel entered the room quietly, carrying a cup of coffee. She handed it to Robert, who accepted it with a nod. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of everything unspoken hanging heavy between them. You did it, Isabel said finally, her voice soft but filled with a mix of pride and weariness. You brought Byron down. Robert stared into the dark liquid in his cup. It's not enough, he murmured. Taking down Byron and the syndicate, it's a start, but it doesn't erase what happened to Nathan. It doesn't change the fact that there are others like Byron out there, waiting for their turn to abuse the system. Isabel sat beside him, placing a hand on his knee. You can't save the whole world, Robert. But you saved Nathan. That's what matters. Robert glanced at his son, his jaw tightening. I just keep thinking, what if I hadn't been able to? What if I didn't have the resources, the training? How many families don't? The question lingered, unanswered. A few days later, Robert found himself standing in a stark interrogation room at FBI headquarters. Across the table sat Byron, his hands cuffed, his face pale and drawn. Gone was the arrogance that had once defined him. In its place was a man broken by the weight of his own actions and the betrayal of those he had trusted. You wanted to talk? Robert said, his voice devoid of warmth. Talk. Byron shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Robert's piercing gaze. I made mistakes, he said finally, but I was just doing what I was told. The syndicate, they own me. If I didn't follow orders. Robert slammed his fist on the table, making Byron flinch. Don't you dare play the victim, he snarled. You held my son underwater, a child. You didn't do that because someone told you to. You did it because you wanted to. Byron's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, he seemed to wrestle with his response, but Robert wasn't interested in excuses. You've already confessed to your crimes, Robert said coldly. You'll spend the rest of your life paying for what you've done. But let me make one thing clear. Men like you, who abuse their power, who hurt the innocent, you'll never win. Not while I'm around. Byron lowered his head, his defeat palpable. Robert stood, his gaze never wavering. Enjoy the time you've got left, Byron. It won't be much. Later that evening, Robert returned to Nathan's room. His son was sitting up, flipping through a comic book, the brightness slowly returning to his face. Robert sat on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip slightly. How are you feeling? Robert asked. Better, Nathan replied, looking up. Mom says I can come home soon. That's good, Robert said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. We miss having you around. Nathan hesitated, then put the comic book down. Dad, are you mad? Robert frowned. Mad? At you? Never. Nathan bit his lip. I didn't want to leave the pool. I thought if I just stood up to him. Robert placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You didn't do anything wrong, Nathan. Standing up for yourself isn't wrong. What Byron did was wrong. And what I want you to remember is that when people do wrong, there are ways to hold them accountable. Like what you did. Nathan asked. Robert nodded. Exactly. Justice isn't about revenge, Nathan. It's about making sure people are treated fairly, that they answer for their actions. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Nathan tilted his head thoughtfully. So you're like a superhero? Robert chuckled softly, ruffling his son's hair. Something like that. As the weeks passed, Robert continued to rebuild the pieces of his family's life. Nathan returned home, his resilience shining through as he began to heal physically and emotionally. Robert, however, couldn't shake the deeper lesson of the case. The world was broken in many ways, but it could be mended piece by piece, case by case. And while Robert couldn't save everyone, he could keep fighting, not just for his son, but for all the sons and daughters who needed someone to stand up for them. The cost of justice was high, but for Robert, it was a price worth paying. The courtroom was nearly silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Byron sat at the defense table, his once imposing demeanor replaced by a pale, nervous wreck. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie, a futile attempt to maintain composure in the face of the mountain of evidence stacked against him. Across the room, Robert sat with his team, his expression calm yet unrelenting, his sharp suit a stark contrast to Byron's disheveled appearance. The trial was the culmination of weeks of preparation, countless hours of piecing together evidence, and a relentless pursuit of justice. Robert knew this was more than just a trial for Byron's crimes. It was a statement, a signal to the community, to the corrupt system, and to his own son that justice wasn't an abstract concept. It was real, and it had consequences. The prosecutor, a sharp and eloquent woman named Monica Pratt, delivered her opening statement with precision and fire. She painted a vivid picture of Byron's abuse of power, recounting the incident at the pool and detailing the broader web of corruption he had been a part of. Officer Byron was not just a man in uniform, Monica declared, her voice steady but filled with conviction. He was a predator, shielded by the very badge meant to protect and serve. His actions on that day were not just reckless, they were criminal. And today, we are here to ensure he faces the full weight of the law. As the trial unfolded, Robert watched from the gallery, his hands clenched tightly on the wooden railing. Witnesses took the stand, parents who had filed complaints against Byron, local business owners who had been extorted, and the lifeguard from the pool, her voice trembling as she recounted the horrifying events. The evidence Robert had gathered became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. The video footage from the pool, the ledgers from the syndicate's safe house, and Byron's own confession painted a damning picture that was impossible to refute. Byron's defense attorney attempted to shift the blame, painting Byron as a man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, coerced by the syndicate he had worked with. The argument was weak, but it was enough to make Robert's blood boil. "They're trying to make him a victim," Isabel whispered, sitting beside Robert. "After everything he's done." "He's no victim," Robert replied quietly, his eyes fixed on Byron. "And the jury will see that." When Robert took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. As an FBI agent, his reputation preceded him, and his testimony carried significant weight. But this wasn't just about his professional expertise. It was about his role as a father. He spoke clearly, his voice unwavering as he recounted the day he received the call about Nathan, the fear that had gripped him, and the lengths he went to uncover the truth. He detailed the evidence he had found, the connections to the syndicate, and Byron's history of targeting vulnerable individuals. But it was when he spoke about Nathan that the courtroom hung on his every word. "My son is 13 years old," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "He loves to swim, to laugh, to live." And that day, Byron tried to take all of that away. Not because Nathan did anything wrong, but because Byron saw him as less than human. No badge, no position of authority, gives anyone the right to do what he did. The jury watched him intently, their faces reflecting the weight of his words. For Robert, this wasn't just about securing a conviction. It was about showing the humanity behind the case, the life that had nearly been lost. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. As the judge read the sentence, decades in prison without the possibility of parole, Byron's head hung low, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his fate. Robert felt no satisfaction in the man's downfall, only a quiet sense of resolution. Justice had been served, but the scars Byron had left behind would take far longer to heal. In the weeks that followed, the case became a catalyst for change. Local activists used the trial as momentum to push for reforms in law enforcement, demanding accountability and transparency. Robert was approached by community leaders, parents, and even victims of Byron's past actions, all thanking him for standing up to the system. But Robert always redirected the credit. "This wasn't just me," he would say. "It was all of us, the witnesses who spoke out, the agents who uncovered the truth, and the people who refused to let this be swept under the rug." One evening, as the sun set over their backyard, Robert and Nathan sat together, the air filled with the hum of crickets and the distant laughter of children playing. "Dad," Nathan began, his voice quiet, "do you think Byron will ever understand what he did?" Robert considered the question carefully. "I don't know, Nathan. Some people spend their whole lives justifying their actions, blaming others. But whether he understands or not isn't what matters." "What matters then?" Nathan asked, looking up at his father. "What matters," Robert said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, "is that we stood up to him, that we made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. Justice isn't always about changing the person who did wrong. It's about protecting those who could be hurt next." Nathan nodded slowly, his young mind processing the weight of his father's words. "Do you think I'll ever be as brave as you?" Robert smiled, pulling his son into a hug. "You already are, buddy. You already are." As the stars began to dip the night sky, Robert felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in weeks. The fight for justice was far from over, but for now, he could breathe. He had faced the storm, not just for himself, but for his son, and emerged stronger. The road ahead would have its challenges, but Robert knew one thing for certain. As long as he had his family by his side, he was ready for whatever came next.